Same old man. Game over.
Johnny. You're gonna need a bigger boat. Wow, so serious.
I am Iron Man.
This is a tasty burger.
Welcome to the In Session Film Podcast.
Welcome to episode 553 for September 26, 2023. I'm JD Duran.
And I'm Brendan Cassidy.
Hey, thanks for joining us, everybody. It is our 2001 retrospective.
Retrospective time.
Here we go. We've been prepping for this for quite some time.
About a year.
Yeah, technically it's been a little bit more than a
Technically,
year.
every time we end a retrospective, we start prepping for the next one a year in advance.
Pretty much. And typically we do this at the end of August. However, this year has had some interesting turns. We've obviously reformatted the podcast a little bit. Ryan and Jay ended up leaving the show. And so there's just been a lot going on this year as far as the podcast is concerned. So a little bit behind, about a month behind, but here we are.
Yeah.
And then, as Brendan noted, as soon as this is over, we will immediately begin preparing
For 2000.
Exactly.
And then, in conjunction with that, best of the decade. This specific decade.
Yeah, which will be interesting. I'm very much looking forward to that. I loved when we did best of the decade for the 2010s.
Oh, yeah, that was a lot of fun.
So I definitely look forward to that for the 2000s as well. In some ways, it's kind of hard to believe because we've been doing these retrospectives for quite some time now. I'm not even sure when we got to 2009. That was like maybe 2016, something, 2015.
I feel like we have to do the math because we do each year 1 year at a time, right? So
there was 1 year, because 2008, we did early, like in March. So like 2008 and 2009, we did in the same year.
We sandwiched those. Okay,
we sandwiched
you're right.
those.
Yeah.
But mostly that's how it's worked, where we do one a year.
Which I like more because then it allows us to digest that full year and really try and see everything that we need to and mitigate as many blind spots as we can, which I feel like we do a fairly good job at. There's always some that we never get the chance to catch up with, unfortunately, just due to time and sometimes due to availability. A lot of these films that we did try to catch up with for the year 2001, some of them are only available on maybe one streaming service.
Yeah,
that's not,
some are hard to find.
That's not accessible to everybody, or some of them aren't even available, period. It's like, unless you own the DVD, you can't watch it.
Yeah, absolutely. So it makes the homework a little challenging at times.
Yeah, you're basically playing detective instead of watching movies.
Absolutely. I feel like we talk about this every single year. There's at least one or two movies that end up as blind spots because the films just aren't available anywhere.
I know.
Unless you go Jack Sparrowing them, and even then, sometimes it's pretty difficult. So
exactly.
I do have my blind spots as I do every year. We'll get to that here in just a minute. However, before we get to the retrospective, I do want to bring this up, Brendan, because as of the night we are recording this is breaking news. It's very rare that you and I talk about breaking news, but here we are.
For our YouTube watchers, do we have like a little icon like that flashes in red breaking news?
Maybe I can make that a post.
Okay, if you can, I'll take your hand.
I should have that up there. However, we do have some breaking news because tonight the WGA now announced that they do have a tentative deal in place with the AMPTP to get back to normalcy. We don't have to get into all of the details here as we do have much to talk about with the retrospective. We do go into this actually a little bit in this week's Patreon episode. If you want to go and check that out, again, that's patreon.com/InSessionFilm. However, what we can say here quickly is that as part of the agreement, it gives them protection against AI.
Yep.
not that AI is going to be obsolete. It's going to be a part of the equation, but they do have protections against it.
Yep.
The WGA will get viewership and streaming numbers, which will play into the residuals and the structure of all of that. They'll get development rooms for writers for TV shows and for movies. And the studios have to provide streaming numbers to the WGA for them to distribute to its members.
And as much as we're concerned about the whole AI aspect of all of this, and I think we should, it certainly is a major talking point from this year. Those residuals, especially as it relates to streaming services, that's what gives me the most hope in how this will eventually affect SAG when an agreement comes their way. Because we hear a lot about these shows that maybe aired on, let's say, AMC back in the day, like Breaking Bad, for instance, right? That all of a sudden one day is the number one streaming show on Netflix, right? So these actors get none of that. So how do you balance that out? Because viewership has changed from the way cable networking television was. So, and that has to be recognized and honored.
Absolutely. It does need to be recognized, and it's been a problem, which is why they were striking in the first place. So I'm glad that they were able to reach a deal that, at least tonight, as I was scouring first reactions, it seems as if many of the writers do think this is a fair deal.
Yeah.
They are happy with it, and they're able to move forward. And that is very exciting.
Yeah.
We're glad that they're able to get protections against AI. That was obviously a huge talking point.
Indeed.
And the residuals was the other massive bullet point here, and that, they were able to figure out a structure there that they have released at least the beginning stages of that with their statement tonight.
Yeah.
Which is very exciting. So I'm glad that we were able to at least get that done.
5 months later.
5 months too late. 5 months too late.
I feel like an episode of SpongeBob when I say it like that. 5 months later.
I mean, it's ridiculous that it took this long, but we are here. We've arrived, and now we can only hope that simultaneously they're negotiating with SAG and they'll come to some sort of agreement there soon as well. We can hope.
We can hope. Yeah, hope for the best.
As of right now, a little bit of optimism, and we needed that.
A nice way to kick off this episode that is all about celebrating.
All about celebrating.
Yeah, so this is the best way to open this up.
Absolutely. However, one more quick thing before we get to the retrospective.
Oh, now you're going to bring it down.
And now I'm going to bring it down because what are the Golden Globes doing? What are they doing? I do not understand this. Earlier today, it was announced that they are introducing 2 new categories to the broadcast this year: cinematic and box office achievement and best performance in stand-up comedy. What is happening?
It's like they heard us all of these years asking for best stunt work. And they said, yeah, we heard you. We're going to give you this instead.
It's so bad. This is so dumb. It's astonishing to me, Brendan, that they've been in such hot water for making obtuse decisions. And here we are where they are just continuing to snowball. What is?
I love your tweet just finding that one GIF from Glass Onion of Daniel Craig. No, it's just dumb.
So perfect.
Oh man, I guess Ryan Johnson is a time traveler because he must have predicted this very moment to be able to utilize that at this time.
Yeah. It was the appropriate screen cap that I could find to articulate how I feel about it, because it really is dumb. I do not understand the Globes at all.
I don't get it either.
They've
I'm not even
always
excited
been
about
weird,
these awards.
I know. They've always been weird, and this certainly adds to that weirdness, but this isn't like an affable eccentricity. This is just straight idiotic. It just makes no sense.
It's so random. It's so random.
So dumb.
It's like, who is asking for this?
Nobody is asking for this. Nobody wants this. It won't surprise me if tomorrow they completely backtrack and go, never mind.
I
We're not doing
I would
that.
love that. That would make for a great story that it only took 24 hours and a lot of loud voices, a lot of loud,
Yeah.
smart voices to tell them otherwise.
Yeah. Because isn't that what the Academy did with that ridiculous blockbuster
Oh
thing
yeah,
they did?
yeah. Was that when Zack Snyder won pretty much everything
Yes.
about that?
Yeah. I can't recall the details and what it was called, but they quickly
I
moved
think it's
on
for the
from that.
best. The fact that you forget everything about it, that means that's a good thing.
Yes. All right. Well, with all of that said, let's go ahead and move on to what we're really here to talk about.
2001, baby,
that
and
is
not Stanley Kubrick's
2001.
2001, the year 2001.
The year 2001. That is cinema. As we do every year with these retrospectives, we'll start here by talking about the year overall, and then we'll get into our top 10 movies of 2001. So to start, Brendan, what do you think about the year on the whole?
We've talked about this a lot, JD, and we talked about this on past episodes. We've kind of revealed this already, right?
A little bit, yeah.
There are certain cinematic years that people tend to associate as the greats, if you want to call it that.
Mhm.
Some of the primary examples we tend to cite are the year 2007, for instance,
Mhm.
right? Obviously, the year that gave us There'll Be Blood and No Country for Old Men and Atonement and Zodiac and Once and the assassination of Jesse James and Ratatouille.
Mhm.
You also have the year 1999. A lot of people cite that one as well. There are various years you can look back to from the 1970s that can almost qualify. Not even almost qualify. They certainly qualify. We don't talk about 2001 enough. We really
No,
don't.
We don't.
Now, is it the most heavy hitting consistently of these years that we've done retrospectives on? I think it's in the conversation. But what makes this one hit hard for me especially is that when I look at my current top 10, I'll say this right now, 8 of my top 10 I'd probably give a perfect 5 out of 5 on Letterboxd. like
Sure.
which
Yeah.
has kind of happened before in past retrospectives we've done. Like 2004 was pretty close, 2007 was also very close, but the majority of these films that we're going to be talking about would sit within some of my all-time favorite films. We're basically we're talking about personal all-timers here, and I don't know if it's because we are of a certain age, you and I. You're a little bit older than I am, but we're still cut from a similar generational cloth, right?
Yeah.
So in many ways, 2001 was kind of a formative year for us as just children growing up, teenagers, really. So perhaps there is maybe a level of nostalgia bleeding into this. I don't know. All I can say is that with this top 10 that I've compiled for this retrospective, it's one of, if not the most passionate I've been about these movies we're going to talk about. And that's what I'm excited about here.
No, I completely echo everything you're saying. This is an all-time year for movies. It really is. And you're right. We've talked about this a few times before. You just noted there as well that oftentimes it's 1939, it's 1976, it's 1994, 1999, 2007, most recently. But 2001 needs to be in this conversation. It really is quite great. And it has some all-time films for me, as it does for you as well.
Yeah.
I also think this is the deepest year. It's not just top heavy, which is something we talked about last year with 2002, which was a good year. It was extraordinary up at the top.
Oh, yeah.
But
those heavy hitters, though, were amazing.
They were
not
so
to knock
great.
that year, but you're
Absolutely.
right. There was more of a slope happening there.
Absolutely. I do think after that top 15 or 20, it did start to fizzle out. And I went back and looked at my top 20 and my honorable mentions for 2002, 3, 4, 5, and 6.
Yeah.
And I think this is the deepest year since 2007. I have another 10 films. My first 10 in my honorable mentions, I think, are very good and could easily make an argument for those last 2 spots.
Yeah.
This is a really deep year.
It is.
It's not just those up at the top, but those at the very top in my top 5, in my top 10, as I'm sure the case will be for you as well. It's strong.
It's very strong.
Really strong.
You know what I think is interesting about this year as well, and I may have mentioned this on a prior episode when we started talking about this very thing. When you look at a year like 2007, for instance, a very great year, a deep year, an astounding year, but a lot of those were kind of immediately great. A lot of those films were very immediately well received and well regarded, and they held that status. I feel like with 2001, the majority of these were still well received, but they kind of found that audience and that greatness even more as time has gone on. So there was maybe more of a sense of discovery with these films, and also being a bit reevaluated as time has gone on in comparison to the current landscape of films nowadays. This is definitely the most evolving form of greatness that we've seen.
That is a really great point, because 10 years ago, I do understand why someone would look at 2001 and say, yeah, that's a really good year, but maybe it's not the greatest of years. But much of that reevaluation has, I think, re-rendered how we look at these movies.
Yeah.
And some of it is personal conviction for sure. When we get to the top 3, 4, maybe even that top 5 there. However, I do think that there's a level of objectivity to this. It's not just going to be Brennan and JD love these movies and no one else does. People love these movies. Absolutely. But a few of them, for sure, it's been a little bit of a journey to get to where they stand publicly, for sure. Yeah. I do agree with you there. And that does make this year unique in that regard. I don't know if we've been able to say that about any other year.
We haven't. I think this is perhaps the most time capsule of a year that we've talked about in any of these retrospectives, because it also represents what the critical mindset and audience mindset was at the time. We just got done reviewing the Royal Tenenbaums, which we both deem as a modern classic, right? At that time, it wasn't really seen as much because it was a little early for Wes Anderson. He hadn't really established himself just yet. He only had 3 films, including that one, if I'm not mistaken. So there was a lot of newness to really understand what it was, and still a lot of uncertainty there. So there was a lot of that happening in 2001 that needed time to digest. And I think that's what makes it so interesting in comparison to these other retrospectives that we've done.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I do love how well-rounded it is. I feel like my top 20 is always a pretty good eclectic mix, but when I look at
this is kind of weird. Mine's kind of weird.
I do love how it features conventional studio films, action films. There's certainly plenty of foreign films, a couple of animated films as well.
Yeah.
2001 was a really fascinating year for comedies as well, both in terms of what has resonated with audiences over the years, but also some subjective JD comedies that taps into that nostalgia element you were talking about. Because
yeah, for sure.
You think of something like Wet Hot American Summer, a big one from that year, The Princess Diaries, Bridget Jones's Diary, Legally Blonde. I mean, say what you will about those films, but they've been in the zeitgeist for quite some time.
I'll go to bat for American Pie too. I will absolutely go to bat for that movie.
I know you have. Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back has certainly been around. Zoolander, I don't love that movie, but a lot of people do.
Yeah, but I know a lot of people do. I'm not a fan, but it does have a bit of a cultural following, right? It definitely represented something for a lot of people.
Absolutely. And I don't love all of those movies.
No.
I do like Legally Blonde. I like Princess Diaries. I really love Wet Hot American Summer. And then there's what I dubbed JD comedies. Saving Silverman was a staple for me in high school. I loved it. I watched that movie a bazillion times. How High is another one of those.
Oh, gosh, I forgot about that. I didn't catch up with it again for this retrospective, but I definitely saw that one.
Absolutely. There is a rowing joke at the beginning of that film that I have said a bazillion times. I don't know why it stays with me, but it does. It's so dumb and ridiculous.
It was a coming of age moment for you, wasn't it?
I love that movie. It's absurd, but that's one that was a staple for me. And with my family, we loved Rush Hour 2. That was something that played in our house quite often.
Huge hit here in the States.
Absolutely. And then there's, when you look at that same idea, but through the prism of the action films of 2001, a few that come to mind for me as well. Behind Enemy Lines is a film that I always really liked from that year. The first Fast and Furious, again, say what you will about it. I do like it. It's not my favorite of the franchise, but
good. Yeah,
it's fine overall.
Yeah.
Spy Game, I think, is actually quite underrated. I really like Spy Game quite a lot and watched that way too many times when I was in college. And then there's something like The Mummy Returns, which is
that's a lot of fun.
And weird.
Okay, now another fun action film. You mentioned the word spy. Was Spy Kids, the first Spy Kids, was that also 2001?
I'd have to go back.
I think it was. I
probably
I used to love that as a kid. I think that's still a pretty fun movie.
And then there's everyone's favorite Michael Bay, Pearl Harbor.
Okay, yeah. Say what you will about that movie, but to your point, and you've made this point many times.
So many times.
The aerial sequences are really good.
Are great. Yeah, I don't like the film on the whole. It's not great. Although I will go to bat for Josh Hartnett. He's having a resurgence. And this was one of those big movies of his. He had a great year, performatively at least, in 2001 because he has this movie and Black Hawk Down in the same year.
Which apparently he was apprehensive about accepting that role in Black Hawk Down because of his work already on Pearl Harbor, but he just, I think I remember reading the trivia, he just wanted the opportunity to work with Ridley Scott. Who doesn't?
Yeah, exactly. No, and, it's one of Ridley Scott's better films of that era, I would say. But, I mean, again, Pearl Harbor isn't great, but I do love the Josh Hartnett of it all, and I do love the aerial sequences. I think are really, really fantastic. Despite how Michael Bay tries to ruin that whole story there.
He tries to Titanicify it.
Yeah, exactly. So it was an interesting year all around. Then you look at award season. A Beautiful Mind ends up winning Best Picture, which we talked about briefly, I feel like, on last week's show. None of the performances cracked our nominations list.
No.
But you did know that you're like, I don't know, like you don't hate the movie, don't love it?
No, I overall, I actually kind of like the movie. And I think really what works best about it is the romantic center of it. When it tries to be a historical film or a film on mental illness, it has a lot of issues. But a lot of it works because of the Jennifer Connelly of it all. I think she is really good in it.
Yeah, she is really good in it. And I'm with you. I don't dislike the movie. I think it's perfectly adequate. Its reputation really comes down to
Best Picture.
The fact that it won Best Picture.
Oh, man, that theme's coming back, isn't it?
Yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit over the years. Similarly with Ron Howard winning Best Director, which is an insane win when you look at the competition.
That was a war crime there.
Oh my gosh. Yeah, that does not age very well. But again, it's awards. What are you going to do? Obviously, Denzel winning for Best Actor, I feel like, is one of those iconic wins that people do remember of that year. Last week when we talked about this, I did not catch up with the film. I hadn't seen Iris yet.
Neither have I.
I did watch that this last week in preparation for this conversation.
Okay, good.
It won't crack my top 20. I will say, though, I do kind of appreciate that movie. Jim Broadbent is very good.
Okay.
And while I still prefer others in his category, it is a really great performance. The nomination, honestly, I have no problem with, given how the Academy works.
Yeah.
And, the type of performances they go for, especially of that time. It's interesting. I think in the context of today, if that was a film that came out this year, I don't it wouldn't surprise me if he doesn't get nominated. He probably would, but he might not win. It's just a very different Academy now than it was 20 years ago.
It was, but there's always this push to have some kind of under the radar film represented in an acting category. And I feel like Iris was sort of that film for this year to just kind of like deviate the wealth, so to speak, and just be a little bit creative with the nominees. Yeah. Not to say that he doesn't earn it. I mean, I haven't seen the film, so I don't know if I would think his performance is worthy of a nomination, or even Judi Dench is in that too, right? She was nominated for Best Actress.
Great. She's fantastic. Kate Winslet is also very good.
Okay.
Given the Academy structure, and again, looking at it through the prism of what the Academy was 20 years ago,
sure,
they are nominees that I do think are warranted. It is, as far as Oscar bait movies go, and I do think in many respects that's the type of movie this is. But I think it also is subversive to that stereotype in some ways, and that's where I was surprised by the film. As much as it is that cloying Oscar-y kind of movie, there are several moments here where it's very much not, and it's trying to punch back against that idea. It's a little bit of a tug of war in that regard. So it's, again, that's why it's not going to crack my top 20 or anything. But as far as Oscar bait movies go of 20 years ago, I would take this over a lot of others, I think.
Okay. All right.
And a lot of it also comes down to the performances. Broadbent, very good.
Gotcha.
In that role. This was also the first year for Best Animated Feature.
It was. That's right.
With
Shrek. Look what you did.
Over Monsters, Inc. and Jimmy Neutron Boy Genius.
And I think it's the lesser of those three nominees. Yes, even including Jimmy Neutron.
I would take it over Jimmy Neutron, but Monsters, Inc. is by far the best of those three.
I mean, where the heck is Waking Life?
Well, see, that's interesting, right? Because Waking Life, if we're considering that animation, and I guess we should because it is, that should be here. And there's another animated film from 2001.
Yeah.
That's not here as well. Millennium Actress should be in a group of 5 here.
Oh, yeah. We consider that a 2002 film, right? When we did our retrospective?
Oh, I don't know, because I saved that for 2001.
If
we had that conversation, it definitely went over me. Yeah, because I do have that in my on here. Yeah.
Ooh, okay. Well, now I might change a few things if we've decided to. Because listeners, watchers out there, you're getting the raw moment of us potentially making a mistake live on the podcast here. I have to go back and check this out. Let me look at my list of 2002, because I could have sworn we chose to leave Millennium Actress for that retrospective because of when it came out in the States. I
mean, you could be correct in that. My notes are very different.
Okay.
So if that is something that we talked about, there clearly was some sort of miscommunication. And I don't really recall the specifics of it if we did have that conversation, but in my notes that I have written here, and this again circles back to this time last year, because that's what we had shifted from 2002 to 2001. I already had Millennium Actress for 2001. So I don't know. Maybe there was some sort of clerical error there.
I'm trying to find this out because I know we have talked about this movie in some capacity. I think I've included it in a top list before. I really do.
I'm not saying that you're wrong.
I'm trying to find this. I'm really
looking at my notes here. That's what
and in a way, I wouldn't be opposed to doing that, and I wouldn't be upset if you're actually right, because then it just means I get to completely update my top list for 2001.
Well, look, this is where things can get interesting, because my notes aren't necessarily accurate or to the truth. I might have just miscommunicated with myself and put it into the wrong category. or in the wrong year. That's certainly possible. But here's the thing, and here's the really fun thing about this. I noted earlier that this was a really deep year, and I have several films fighting for a spot. So if this simply comes down to moving that out for something else, I can do that.
So
I can't do that.
I just went on to InSessionFilm.com, went to our podcast tab under main show. We have a tab called Year-End Top 10 Lists.
Yes.
I have Millennium Actress at number 6 for 2003.
Oh, wow. Okay. I wasn't even close with my notes then. That's
I'm trying
no
to double
problem
check this.
then.
I'm trying to double check this. It must have been noted as an independent or limited release in the United States in the year September 12th, 2003, U.S. limited release.
Okay. Look, no
But-
problem.
But
No sweat
to
off
your,
my back. I got to fix.
okay. But to your point, given its release as it was, it would most likely find a place in Best Animated Feature this year that we're talking
For
about
this
now.
Oscars.
Yeah, because we know the Academy doesn't play by our rules or by our criteria.
Exactly.
So, yeah.
Exactly.
yes.
Anyway, that was a long way to say that it probably would have qualified for this Oscars and should have been nominated.
Well, you had me
for-
second guessing something, because if we did end up qualifying it for 2001, I may have ended up changing my top 10. Like, that's how much I like that movie.
Yeah, I love it too. No,
Yeah.
I love it too. Look, it's high on my list here, but I can move it out. It's no sweat off my back. I got plenty of other films here that I can.
It's like, all
Replace it
of a
with-
sudden, the year 2001 has nothing.
Yeah, look, I've already made the change. Look, it's no problem. So we're good.
Oh, Millennium Actress, you ruined me.
No, it's a great movie.
It's
Absolutely.
an
great
amazing movie. Yeah.
But circling it back to the Oscars, if Waking Life and Millennium Actress qualifies for this Academy Awards, for the 74th Academy Awards,
Yeah.
then yeah, Shrek is 4th on my list.
It was perfect for the time. Like that movie was very much, again, it was a time capsule type of animated movie in this case. The sense of humor was very new for that type of family-friendly entertainment. And I feel like it led to something that other movies have just done so much better, that Shrek has kind of gotten behind the times simultaneously now.
Yeah.
But again, I have to give the film credit for coming out at the right moment.
For sure.
The timing of it was certainly on its side.
Absolutely. All right, before we get to our top 10 list, a few more films I want to note here.
Okay.
And then quickly talk about the box office. So best foreign language film was No Man's Land, the Bosnian film. Have you seen that?
I have not. That was on my list, but didn't quite get to it.
Yeah, that's one that I recently caught up with and liked, didn't love,
Okay.
but do like the film. It's funny. It's surprisingly funny in its commentary, but it also ends in this strange, with this strange bleakness. Like that is
Interesting.
that kind of hits hard. I do understand why people love it. It's not my favorite foreign language film of that year, but do understand the appeal there. The Palme d'Or winner was The Sun's Room, and another one of those that I liked, didn't love. And that one is a little bit of a surprise because that feels like a JD movie. Like you read the synopsis of it, you understand what you're walking into, and you anticipate that I'm going to walk away utterly gobsmacked. And there is an emotional core to it that I was moved by, but there are little things of it, some manufacturing of the film that doesn't wholly work for me.
Okay.
So it's a film I like, don't love though.
Okay.
Have you seen that one?
I have not seen that one either.
Okay. The last one I'll say here, and I'll try to be brief. I mentioned this on a Patreon episode, actually, if you want to go and listen to me completely rave about this movie. The winner for Best Documentary that year is a movie called Murder on a Sunday Morning.
Yeah.
And you talk about a huge surprise. Like I was utterly surprised.
That is one I did catch up with because of your rave thoughts on that Patreon episode. I was so confused by how much I laughed. It's
so funny, right? It is so
wow.
funny. And to me, that's why, like, I was maybe a little facetious when talking about it on Patreon, but I went as far as to say it might be the biggest surprise of that decade for me, because you read what it's about and you expect it to be political, to have this progressive mindset behind it when talking about the injustices of Black men in this country and how they are targeted simply for being in the wrong place at the wrong time and looking a certain way. And that is how it starts off, but soon it becomes a courtroom drama, and it just becomes this incredible duo, these lawyers just completely dunking on these fools on the stand, and it is hilarious. It is so funny.
That's the thing. It almost becomes like this, like, attempt at satire in real life against the injustice system.
Yes. I mean, one of the best scenes of 2001 was the lawyer talking about how he was outside smoking a cigarette.
I love that.
And one of the detectives,
I love that moment.
Went up to him and said, "Hey, you should stop, stop choking down one of those cancer sticks." To which the lawyer says, "I like to have a smoke before sex." And he says, "I told him that because, I said that because I knew I was going to screw him." And
That's
I did.
amazing. That's amazing.
It's just so
It's
good.
like a roast. The movie feels like a roast.
It is. It's a comedy roast. That really is what that movie is.
Yeah.
And I did not anticipate that in the slightest.
No, it was quite enjoyable. I do agree.
So do really like that one for best documentary. All right, real fast. Box office for 2001.
Yes.
Number 10, Hannibal. Everyone's favorite Hannibal movie.
Not good. Not good.
$350 million worldwide. Planet of the Apes at number 9. Also, everyone's Planet of the Apes movie.
Also not good.
$362 million worldwide. At number 8, everyone's favorite Jurassic Park movie, Jurassic Park 3.
Hey, second best Jurassic Park movie. Don't at me.
I do
Still
like
not
it
great, but it's my second favorite. I'll at least say that.
368 million worldwide. At number 7, The Mummy Returns. Fun movie. Weird but fun.
I'll go with that.
433 million. At number 6, everyone's favorite Michael Bay, Pearl Harbor.
We already talked about it.
450 million worldwide. Number 5, Ocean's 11. $450 million worldwide. And number 4, Shrek at 487. Number 3, Monsters Inc. at 528.
All right.
And then the top 2, Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring at number 2, $883 million worldwide. And number 1, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone, or Sorcerer's Stone, depending on where you're from.
I like how you went with its British title. Yeah.
I mean, that's what it says here, but...
Yep, that is the worldwide box office. So, of course, that makes a lot of sense.
Worldwide. And,
of course, the top 2 would be arguably the biggest blockbuster trendsetters of the entire decade.
The whole decade.
Yeah.
It starts in 2001. Absolutely. Indeed. All right, Brennan, let's talk about some coffee. I love it and need it.
Yeah. We're going to need it, especially during this exercise, our 2001 retrospective. It takes a lot out of us. We're going to be exhausted. We need that pick-me-up, and we want that pick-me-up to taste good.
Exactly. Absolutely. That's why we go to Coffee Cult, because they source only specialty grade Arabica coffee from around the world. What does that mean? Well, Arabica coffee, specialty grade Arabica, is the best quality grade of coffee you can get. So we're talking about the best beans that the world can supply.
Yep.
And roasting it in a specific way that extracts the best flavor possible. And they do this with, their roasting process. They do it through inspecting the beans, selecting only those that qualify to be a part of the roasting process. There's a lot that goes into it.
Yeah.
So we're talking about the highest quality of coffee that is humanly possible. And as if that's not good enough, they roast to order. So they wait for your order to come in. It's roasted, then it's shipped off. So you're guaranteed freshness every time.
I love that.
Every bag of coffee is guaranteed fresh.
Oh, it's so good.
It's
I remember
incredible.
that first bag I tried, courtesy of you, JD. That Sumatra. I'll never
It's
forget
good.
that. I'll never forget
Yep.
that.
The Sumatra is quite fantastic. I do if you like chocolatey, earthy notes, that Sumatra is really prime,
It's a
especially
dessert
this time
coffee.
of year.
Oh,
Maybe
it's
not
perfect for fall. It's so
perfect
perfect.
for fall. Absolutely. When the air starts to become crisp and a little cooler for, I'm speaking out of jealousy here, for all of you outside of Florida. God!
So
you're gonna
the
get-
majority of America.
The majority of America that gets to experience the cooler air, that Sumatra is going to hit. It's going to hit real nicely.
Imagine how that would taste, sitting outside on your deck on a fall day, like in a cabin in the woods or something.
Exactly.
Oh man,
Leaves
trees are
changing
turning
colors
brown
and falling. Oh my gosh, it's so good. So definitely recommend this Sumatra this time of year for sure.
Yeah.
It's very good. They have a variety of other blends and single origins that you can go and check out. This is a company that also works specifically with their farms ethically and fairly. That is another big part of their work as well. And right now, if you go to coffeecult.com, that's coffee with a K, cult with a K, go to coffeecult.com, get 15% off with our code ISF. Again, that's 15% off with our code ISF. You're going to love it. So go and check them out. Again, that's coffeecult.com. All right, Brendan, we need to talk about the In Session Film Store. Because
I'm worried. I worry about you, man. I worry about you. That's the deal.
There's a few new things happening. I'm always trying to come up with different ideas. So recently we got these new shirts. I'll always worry about you. That's the deal. The new Midnight Special shirts. Those are available right now in sessionfilm.com/store. Or
beautiful design. Beautiful design. Well
thank
done,
you.
man.
Appreciate it. You can also go to tpublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. So go to TeePublic. You can also just search In Session Film. You'll find us there on TeePublic.
Yep.
We also have a new shirt, brand new, that I am very excited about. Now, I want to preface this by saying, if you're a La La Land fan, do not be offended by this.
This is
fact,
a pro.
anything,
This is a
great
pro
thing.
La La Land shirt.
It's a pro La La Land shirt, but also pro Moonlight. Because look, everybody wins here. Everybody wins. So we got a new shirt right now. I'm going to put it up on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. We got a new shirt.
Oh, look at that.
Where the best thing that happened to La La Land is that it lost Best Picture to Moonlight. That's the new shirt. And I'm very excited about this because
it's cute.
we all know that Moonlight winning Best Picture that year was the best thing.
Yeah.
The Moonlight fans were fervent, passionate. They really wanted that film to win, and it's deserving. It's a phenomenal film. It's one of the best of 2016. Movie. I have no issues with Moonlight winning. It's a great movie. I love it. In my top 3 of that year as well.
Yeah.
La La Land, also great, and it avoids so much more hassle by losing. Nobody talks about that film nearly as much now.
Oh,
if that film had won Best Picture, people would still be bitching and moaning about it. However, we've avoided it, so everybody wins, and we all get. So whether you're on Team La La Land or Team Moonlight, we can all.
The whole message of this shirt is just like both movies. It's okay.
That's it.
Okay.
I mean, ultimately, that's the irony of it. Like, it's okay to just love both movies.
Yeah.
So we hope that you enjoy this. It's one of our favorite, at least one of my favorite phrases that have come about because of the show. We hope that you enjoy it. So again, go and check that out. But we have a bunch of other T-shirts and designs available. There's a Barbie design. There's a Star Wars inspired design.
Indeed.
Women in Session is up there. If you're a fan of Women in Session, definitely go and check all that out. And you can get these designs on a lot of things, not just T-shirts, mugs, stickers, phone cases, whatever it is that you want to enjoy. Go and check all of that out. Again, InSessionFilm.com/store or tpublic.com/stores/InSessionFilm. Go and check it out. Get your La La Land Moonlight t-shirt today. All right, with all of that laid out, a really interesting year for film, but now let's get to the best. Let's talk about our top 10 movies of the year. Brendan, what do you have
This
at
is
number
daunting.
10.
This is daunting. Okay, before we get into our top 10s, JD, should we have a little fun with this? Because we normally
Sure.
do our top 5s as far. I mean, we do a top 10 on all these retrospectives, but we always like vocalize and explain our top 5s only, just to save time, right?
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of these films have been talked about before in one way, shape, or form on the podcast. So it should hopefully allow us to practice a little bit more brevity, I guess, when talking about these. And we always have some crossover. We're always going to have crossover. So here's my question.
Okay.
How many crossovers do you think we're going to have?
Great question. I think here off the cuff, looking at my list, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I think 7.
Okay. We're thinking alike, I guess, because
maybe
I was thinking
8. Could be 8, but at least 7.
I don't think it's going to be 8. I don't think it's going to be 8.
Okay.
I think it's going to be 6 or 7.
Okay.
But what I have at my number 10 will determine if it's going to be 7, because this is one I don't know if it's in your top 10.
Well, and here's the thing before you get to it.
Yeah.
Brendan is always full of surprises when it comes to these lists.
I've got a few surprises that I know won't be in your top 10.
I've
already taken account for those.
For The Sun's Room, A Beautiful Mind, Behind Enemy Lines, one of these movies. Vanilla Sky is somehow at number 10. Like, I don't know what it's going to be, but there's going to be a weird thing that I do not anticipate showing up on Brendan's list.
Yeah, we'll get to that. There's at least 1 or 2 that I think you might feel like, oh, I did not see that coming. But I think just for the sake of time, JD, we might structure this a certain way. So
sure.
When I get to my number 10, if you happen to have it somewhere else on your list that's not a heavy hitter, like number 1, 2, or 3, we'll just talk about it collectively, right? You might have it at like number 7 or 8 or something like that. And we'll kind of go back and forth in that way. And the reason why I want to do that, and I was waiting to reveal this, I think this is going to be a similar situation as 2004, where we had the exact same top 4, just in a different order. I think we have the same top 3. I genuinely think we have the same top 3 at the very least.
Yeah, I would be, and this is interesting because I do feel like oftentimes we'll have a few in the top 5, but it's not quite verbatim the same. I'm with you. I think our top 3, different order, but it'll be the same 3 films, maybe even the top 4.
I have a notepad here to write these down so I can actually show it live to see if, to show that I'm actually guessing correctly. But we'll get to that point later. I'll start off with what I have as my number 10, and I don't know if it's in your top 10. It's at least in your top 20.
I want to do this. I am going to blind myself from the camera. So I'm not looking. So for those watching the video, you can see this. I am going to not look. I just want you to show the notepad before we get into it.
Oh, so I have to show what my number 10 is.
Any accusations that, he just wrote it down as they went. No, I am going to close my eyes and you just show it to the camera.
All right. So this is my number 10.
Okay.
All right.
So did you show? I want you to show the top 3. Show the top 3.
You want me?
Yeah,
I thought you wanted me to show just my number 10. Okay, well then.
No, I want you to show your top 3. Well then,
okay.
Maybe we can do that. Well,
redo. I'm gonna show my top 3. I have to write this down.
Okay, because I don't want. I just don't want anyone to think, he just wrote it down as they went. So that way the audience is aware of where your list is going to go, and we'll see if it matches mine exactly. So that way there's no cheating.
So now I have to write out my. Give me a second. This is what happens when we do this in real time, folks. Tell me a story, JD.
Well, there's been some melodrama in my life recently.
Is that so? Really?
Yeah, there has been. It's been really fascinating and frustrating and weird. I feel like I'm living a movie in some ways.
Oh, yeah, I feel the same way. When you plan a wedding, there's always drama. I'll tell you about it offline. There's some of it you might be able to relate to. All right, JD, keep covering your eyes. I have them written down here. Not the best handwriting, but I've just revealed my top 3 of the year.
Okay.
In this order.
Okay. All right. So we'll see if that lines up with mine at when we get to that point.
It's a fun little experiment. We've never done it this way.
Never done it this way, but we've never had video before. So this is
That's
a way
true.
to, introduce
This podcast
this
is
in a
going to go
different
pretty
way.
long now, isn't it?
Yeah, for those on the audio side of this, I do apologize. But, go watch
Hopefully the
video
banter's
on
still
YouTube.
good, right? Yeah, if it's still fun to listen to, then we're at least doing something right. But maybe it'll provoke you all to go to our YouTube page and actually see what we, how
at
we
least
look doing this
at
crap.
least for that portion of it, because I don't want there to be any accusations. So now that there's video,
there's evidence.
Before we get to it, before Brendan and I have talked about it, we have not shared these lists at all. I have no idea what is going to be on this list. But I do
and I still
know-
have it here, so I'm putting my pen away. So this way,
Okay.
our watchers on YouTube know I'm not making changes to it mid-show just to match up
There we
to any
go.
prediction. So it's right here. It's right here, and I'll pick it up when we get to that moment of the show.
Okay, perfect.
So anyway,
number 10.
Number 10 is Black Hawk Down.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know if it's in your top 10. I'm guessing it's in your top 20. I think at the very least it's in your top 20.
Number 11 for me. We were
All right.
this close.
So then I'm
That
going to
close.
predict we have 6 crossovers in our top 10. That's my
Okay.
prediction. So I'll hold
Okay.
to that. But yeah, I do think Black Hawk Down rocks. And
It's so good. Yeah.
Rewatching it again, because I know that the film has been subject to some controversy around its politics and its depiction of Somalia and the war front there. But I don't know, rewatching it again, and maybe this will get me into trouble. I don't see the movie as jingoistic as some people do.
I don't either.
Yeah, I think, there is a brutality there for sure, but again, I don't mean any disrespect to anyone that does feel differently about this, but sometimes nowadays, I feel like some people do confuse jingoism with patriotism. And I do think this film more represents the latter because it's more interested in what attributes our nation lacks as opposed to what we can achieve, because it blatantly calls out our arrogance to take on this mission that some would say wasn't even ours.
Yes.
It's interested in that. Now, to be fair, there might be elements of Eric Bana's monologue at the end that might contradict that a little bit. So if there is one flaw I have with the movie, it's maybe more around that, but it's still a small enough moment to maintain enough broadness and a political ambiguity that the film overall still works. So I don't really see the movie as blatant American heroism. I see it as accepting responsibility for our mistakes. And any heroism that comes from that is really just out of necessity. So I think that's where the film is really provocative, but it's also just so well made. I mean, this might be, it's not the greatest war film I've ever seen. Don't get me wrong, but it might be the best choreographed and storyboarded war film ever made. Just because this basically is a 2.5 hour scene. That's what the movie is, one continuous scene. And the fact that it has such synchronicity in getting from A to B to Z, and it almost mathematically makes sense, I think it is one of Ridley Scott's best achievements just because of that.
Yeah.
So I think it's great. I think it's a great film.
I am completely with you. This was in my top 10 for quite a while, for a few months, up until recently when I was going through, did some rewatches, and when I was reshuffling my list, it sadly became a victim of the top 10, but it sits at number 11. I love this as well.
Okay.
And I am wholeheartedly with you as it relates to the jingoism discourse that surrounds this film. And the irony of it is that this is a story where the U.S. military objectively fails in their mission.
Yeah.
They fail. So it's really funny and ironic to me, the American go us perspective that some people talk about with this film. I don't think it gives respect to the Somalians, as we have pointed out, but I don't think we can sit here and act as if this is some sort of heroic, incredible achievement, because that's just not the truth of the matter. There is some individual heroism for sure, but on the whole, this is a mission that went very badly, and it cost some Americans their lives. So if anything, it's as much a commentary on the futility of the American military middling with other nations' affairs as it is any sort of American cheerleading. Which is, makes sense to me why Eric Bana's character is a little apathetic toward war and violence and everything that he talks about there at the end of the film. And in terms of the craftsmanship of the film, this is really Scott at his peak. He is cooking.
I think it's a top 5 Ridley Scott film for me.
It is so good. Yeah. In terms of the choreography, the explosions, the sound design of it all, it is visceral. It's really visceral. It's violent. There's some imagery here regarding the violence that you just can't get out of your mind. The performances here are incredible. And talk about a stacked cast that in 2001 you didn't realize how stacked of a cast.
Don't you love when that
is.
happens? When you see like a Tom Hardy walk through and he's barely even there.
I mean, and he's so young too. You hardly recognize him.
For sure.
But there's so many performances here that I do think that while their screen time is limited because there's so much of the action that really Scott has to get to, but I do find it memorable. You know, like the soldier falling out of the helicopter, or you think of the moment where the soldier gets shot in the leg and he's on the table there and they have to perform surgery there on the spot. Like that is a guttural performance that is really hard to watch.
Yeah.
And that all comes down to the craft of this film and what Ridley Scott was trying to achieve in terms of that visceral experience. It's fantastic. And I just don't agree with the politics, at least the discourse that centers on politics with this film. This is anything but a jingoistic film. If anything, it's the opposite.
It kind of is, yeah.
I don't get that.
It carries the tone of a jingoistic film, especially with the Jerry Bruckheimer of it all behind it. So I can see that, but I think that just makes the film all the more like ironic in its presentation. And I don't know if that was the point, but that works in its favor, if you ask me.
I agree. And there's just the overall like a tenseness to the film. It's very dramatic, cinematic. Oh, it's great.
It's great.
All right.
So what's your number 10?
Very different movie. Baz Luhrmann. Moulin Rouge.
You got Moulin Rouge in your top 10. Holy cow.
I do. I love this movie. I have clamored for this film for quite a long time.
I
think the musical numbers here are extravagant. The set design and costuming is luxurious. The performances are mesmerizing. And there's this captivating emotional romance at the center of it that I think is incredible as it relates to Satine and how she desperately wants to leave the Moulin Rouge and have this life with Christian. But there's, of course, this illness that ties her down. And this is something that from the beginning of the film, the audience learns that there is something underneath that is keeping her from, being able to achieve this life that she wants. And so the film uses this dramatic irony as a sobering reminder that happiness will eventually come to this abrupt end. There are these vibrant themes reflected in Luhrmann's artistry and its ideas of love and beauty and connection that is juxtaposed with this inevitable truth as it relates to loss and sorrow in reality. And it is incredible, that juxtaposition. In fact, it reminded me a little bit, not entirely, but a little bit of our conversation on the Royal Tenenbaums, in the sense that with Wes Anderson, you think of his quirky sensibilities, his humor, the fun that often comes with him. And similarly, when you think of Baz Luhrmann, you think of his flamboyance and his flourishes and the costuming and the cinematography. They both are cut from the same cloth in terms of their eccentricity in that way. But Moulin Rouge, like the Royal Tenenbaums, has this sorrow lingering underneath. Now, for Tenenbaums, that sorrow is a little bit more palpable and visceral, for sure, as we talked about in that review. Where in Moulin Rouge, it's not quite on the surface. It's just there bubbling because we know something is wrong with Satine. But when that does come to fruition and you see this romance begin to blossom and you think there's going to be a sacrifice, but then there's an embrace and an acceptance of it all, and how that is undercut, I just find so devastating and heartbreaking
Okay.
and emotional. And for me, this is Baz Luhrmann's best film. It's not even close as far as I'm concerned.
I still like The Great Gatsby.
I do too. I
yeah.
like Gatsby a lot too, but
Yeah.
Moulin Rouge for me hits on a different level.
I like this film quite a bit, though. It's I think what I respect most about it is just how bonkers it is.
It is weird. That's the other thing.
Weird movie, and
I love how weird it is.
Yeah,
yeah, that's another element.
This is not quite in my top 20, but I still do quite like it. I'd say of the Baz Luhrmann's done, I think 6 films as a director, if I'm not mistaken. This is definitely in the top half, at least for me. I do think it is very entertaining. Simply because of how weird it is. Like there's nothing else like it, and I respect that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a film that I love. And again, echoing the performances, they're really great. The music, the direction of it all is just fantastic. So
yeah, it's great.
My number 10. All right, number 9, what do you got?
Number 9, this I think will be one of the surprises where you probably go, wow, I did not expect to see that in your top 10, Brendan. Wet Hot American Summer.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah,
okay.
yeah. I needed a me film in here, a me film, and to be perfectly honest, as far as a film and how it functions as a film, do I think there are better films from this year? Yeah, I do. I absolutely do. But I have not been able to get this vibe out of my head. After watching this again, I watched it with my fiance Maris, and immediately afterwards, well, first off, watching it with her, I was more invested in her reaction to it because she had no idea who was in it, other than the fact that looking at the poster, she can kind of see Paul Rudd. So she was able to at least pinpoint that. But when like Amy Poehler and Bradley Cooper show up, she's what? And yeah. I ever since then, I could not get the vibe out of my head to the point that we immediately started watching the 2 Netflix miniseries afterwards. The prequel one, First Day at Camp, and then the 10 years later sequel miniseries afterwards, and enjoyed them both. Enjoyed them quite a bit. The irreverent sense of humor that this film presents is just something I've always had kind of a soft spot for. So that's why I really feel the need to put it in this list. So I don't know if this is a surprise for you, JD, hearing this in my top 10. I assumed you would probably think it was going to be my top 20 at least, but seeing it in my top 10, I don't know if that's a surprise, but I think it's one of the most rewatchable films from this year, if you ask me.
It's a good film. I really liked it quite a lot on this rewatch. And in fact, as I noted earlier, because of our miscommunication, or rather I simply misnoted here in my notes with Millennium Actress that I needed to replace that film, and Wet Hot American Summer is the film that now jumps onto my list. So
okay. So you have it at number 20?
So I do have that at number 20 here.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I it's a film I really do like, and I contemplated, those last final few spots anyway, because it is a joy. I absolutely love this movie. It's weird and bizarre at times, but I know when you're on its wavelength, it is incessantly amusing.
I really think this should have been seriously considered for Best Original Song. The song Higher and Higher that ends the movie. It hasn't left my brain in a month and a half. It hasn't. It is a classic 1970s, 1980s style arena rock song through and through. I love it.
Good stuff. All right, for my number 9, I'm going to Amelie, which features one of the best performances of the year with Audrey Tautou. I love this film. It's very smart and sophisticated with its filmmaking. The screenplay is excellent. I love what it's doing thematically. I think it is surprisingly profound. Even if it seems simple on the surface, I don't think it's simple in execution. There's something very pure about it. It's one of the purest films I've maybe ever seen, despite its sophisticated execution, and how it taps into this idea of healing the world with joy, how that comes about throughout the film, I think is really quite great. In fact, when we did give this a review, we went into many examples and why its execution is so important. It's funny, we talk about that often on this show, that a film isn't what it's about, it's how it's about. This is maybe surprisingly very quintessential to that, because what we see from an A to Z standpoint doesn't seem as if it's anything all that crazy. But when you really dig beneath the surface and you look at the actions that are, that are driving these characters, there's really a lot more there. It's stunningly detailed and evocative in that regard. But I think the camera work, the cinematography, the set design of it all is just fantastic. I love this film. It's my number 9.
I have this. Where do I have this? I think I have this at like 21 in my
Okay.
list right now. It just misses my top 20. Really, my only issue with it is the central romance just doesn't really work for me. And I don't know if it's the character of Nino, I believe his name is, or the performance there. Just something about that doesn't quite click. And I say that as an unfortunate reaction to this movie, because everything else that you're talking about, everything involving Amelie herself and her desire to be this do-gooder for others, these random other people that really mean nothing to her, this romance is inside what I think is a 5-star movie. Those things are great. That phone booth sequence that really kickstarts the entire plot, more or less.
Yeah.
That's an all-timer. It's one of the best scenes of the entire year that we're talking about here.
I agree.
And I guess I bring that up to say, like, I wish that one component really worked for me, because then this would have been in my top 10. I would have joined you in this.
Yeah, that's very fair. And it does work for me. I obviously do not share that reservation.
Gotcha.
It might not be the strongest component of the film, but it certainly doesn't degrade the film all that much for me. And I just think its execution, its ideas, its performance, its central performance especially, I think is just incredibly evocative.
I do love Audrey Tautou in this.
She's great.
So good. Yeah, I mean, we both had her in our Best Actress Awards category for that episode last weekend. And I think rightfully so. She should have gotten more awards contention for this performance. I think it's great. All right, so my number 8, is that where we're at now?
That's where we're at.
You better have this on your list. Otherwise, I'm going to... If you don't have this on your list, I'm going to laugh. Christopher Nolan's Memento.
Yes, I have this at number 7.
Okay, perfect. So let's talk about it. This is my favorite Nolan film. It's hard to say it's his best crafted film. I think it's his... I don't even know if I want to say it's his best written film, but it's the film where the screenplay is the true star of this movie. And I think what's so interesting is that you can watch it and get a completely different emotional experience if you watch it in chronological order. And I like how the film works in multiple ways. So I love that about it, but I just like how, from a tonal standpoint, not only does it have a real sense of drama to it, but this is also a very funny film. At times, like Guy Pearce's performance as Leonard, or Lenny, as Joe Pantoliano's character calls him, like, there is kind of a quirky uncertainty about him when he realizes he's chasing someone. Then, oh no, they're chasing me. It's like little moments like that. It's a very clever film. That it's not surprising that it was nominated for Best Screenplay at the Oscars for that clever aspect to it. I think this film rocks. I really do. I think it's early Nolan, but it's when Nolan was able to combine the emotional side and his mathematical side in such a way that really is most reminiscent of, like, Oppenheimer, honestly. I feel like Oppenheimer and Memento almost have a lot of comparisons as far as how they tell their respective stories. And I think they might be his 2 best films, ironically. So it just goes to show where I think his strengths are. But I think this movie's great. Memento is my number 8.
I completely agree. I love this. The script here by Nolan is immaculate. The performance by Guy Pearce is mesmerizing. And it is interesting. I do love that duality as you're talking about that. Yes, at its core, it's exploring memory, identity, the pursuit of truth. And there is a heft to that here dramatically, but it is very funny at times. And I think that tonal balancing act is really quite great here. And I think that draws you into the performance. It certainly draws you into the mystery, the neo-noir aspect of it all.
Yeah.
And as it gets into this dichotomy of memory and how Leonard manipulates his condition to give himself a sense of purpose. He has these incisive, self-constructed lies that are tattooed onto his body permanently.
I love
and
that.
That's a contrast that I think is absolutely fascinating here, emphasizing further the idea of what's true and what isn't, and that whole idea of memory being unreliable and how that drives the character is just incredible.
This is the quintessential definition of what an unreliable narrator is.
100%. Absolutely.
I mean, it's obvious. I mean, it's so literal about that. But again, Nolan has a lot of fun with that notion. This movie's a lot of fun, even despite the devastating nature around it.
And I love how that comes through, not just in the character and what he tells the audience or what he tells himself, but how that comes through in his condition, how he acts on that through his condition, specifically with the tattoo. So the unreliable narrator is it's a plot cue in this film. Like it's necessary in driving the plot. Yeah. But it also emphasizes his psychology, and Guy Pearce is great at bringing that out. So,
and I think it was Roger Ebert who said this when he and Richard Roper reviewed the movie when it first came out. I remember watching this as a kid when I was first getting into film criticism and just movies in general. I heard their review about this, and Ebert made a great point that the narrative structure, the two timelines that go forwards and backwards respectively, it's almost like it's giving the audience short-term memory loss. So the trickery of that, I think, is really clever.
Absolutely. We experience the same disorientation and confusion as Leonard. And that's really difficult to achieve, I think. And, Nolan, the way he plays with time, it's his thing. It's certainly part of his own identity. And
for sure,
how he makes that part of Leonard's identity here is just incredible. So that is my number 7 here.
So we finally got some crossover here. Yes. All right. I like it. We're 1 down. I'm predicting 6, so we only have 5 more to go.
I know. So did you want to move on to your number 7?
No,
or
let's go to your number 8. You'll go to your number 8, and then so I might have to make some notes so we actually remember where our places are. So
fair enough.
Yeah, so let me pull up my Word doc.
I'm curious if this is on your list because I know it's a film that you love. I'd be surprised if it's not in your top 20, but I think it's in your top 20. I don't know if it's in your top 10 or not.
Okay.
Guillermo del Toro's The Devil's Backbone.
It's my number 4.
Number 4. Okay. Well, that solidifies that we don't have the same 4.
Well, I think we have the same 3. The same 4, maybe not, because that was the year 2004 was just weird. Like we basically had the same brain for that entire year. But the Devil's Backbone I have in my top 5. That's my number 4.
Okay, so that's your number 4. It's my number 8. I love this movie, and I mean, it's Guillermo del Toro taking what appears to be at first this conventional ghost story that takes place during the Spanish Civil War, and he turns it into something more deeper, something more emotional. By the end, it's not just this meditation on how the past haunts us, but how intimate that is, especially from a child's perspective. And when you couple that with his stunning craftsmanship in filmmaking, it really becomes something quite potent in the end, especially when you consider the political backdrop here and how that does help drive much of what we see. And that collision of the political and the horror and the emotion, I just think is so engrossing here, and I love it. I'm very moved by it cinematically and of course emotionally. It's a horror film, but not conventionally so. Certainly, I mean, it's very Del Toro-esque. I don't know how else to describe it other than that. You know what I mean?
It's very early Del Toro though. Like what I love about the film is that because something we love about Del Toro nowadays is how he's able to find such sweetness among the monstrous and the grotesque, but The Devil's Backbone has kind of a bitterness to it, almost like this deep-rooted anger that I only feel like an early Del Toro could achieve. One that's like a director that's still rough around the edges a little bit, and I like that the film even aesthetically has this kind of crudeness to it. And it's a film I probably shouldn't love as much as I do because, JD, you know how much I don't like violence against children in movies, and this movie goes there. There's a moment where it goes there, and yet somehow seeing it go there and the fact that it leads to our group of young Maine boys seeking such vengeance against what might be one of the most evil men in movie history, that was just such catharsis for me. Such catharsis.
It's great.
Yeah. But I do love this movie quite a bit. It does feel a lot like a precursor to what you'd see in Pan's Labyrinth or The Shape of Water. But yeah, I think it's one of Del Toro's most tragic films, and the way it depicts childhood trauma, it doesn't wear it on its sleeve as heavily, which I really like about that. And it really paints that trauma as the true monster of this story.
I agree.
I think it's great.
I am completely there with you.
All right.
Shall we move from here?
All right. So where are we?
Number
so that was your let's go to, well, I guess my number 7, right?
Your number 7.
Yeah. And this is going to get
all over the place.
This is going to get confusing. Okay. So first off, let me just make a few scratch notes here to know where I am because, okay. So we already talked about Memento. That was my number 8 and that was your number 7, right? So we have that there. My number 7 is, I think my number 7 is your number 4.
Okay.
Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring.
Well done. Well done. Yeah.
All right. So let's, do we even really need to talk about this one? We gave a full review of this back in our Lord of the Rings movie series leading up to, that was the year 2003. We timed that with that retrospective with the Return of the King winning Best Picture that year, obviously. And it's kind of a futile exercise to say what your favorite Lord of the Rings film is, right? Because this really is an act 1 to a 12-hour movie in many ways. But if I had to pick a favorite segment of these 3 acts, it is the Fellowship of the Ring because it's the one it's the one that feels the most complete and mystifying on its own. It invites the audience into this world in a beautiful way. And it's also the one that I feel like has its own thematic subtext about what it means to actually fail at your mission. And the way it deals with failure is quite profound, especially from a cultural standpoint. You've got these different demographics, elves, dwarves, hobbits, that represent their own cultural ethos, and they just don't collectively agree. And that's really the foundation of this movie for me. So yeah, for all those reasons that we've already talked about many times and just the sheer artistry of it, the fact that Peter Jackson made what was essentially going to be the most defining movie in blockbuster history, at least of our time. But he didn't try to do that, right? I mean, he was basically just making an epic. And he treated it very seriously. And that's why I think the film really works, because there is that sincerity to it. He wasn't trying to replicate something. He was just making a passionate movie that happened to be big and fantastical.
Absolutely.
And I think he did a great job with it.
I agree. This is incredible the way he's able to blend spectacle and storytelling and characterization, because I think all 3 of those elements here are just astounding. As an epic, as a journey, and as we're going through Middle Earth and we're immersed into the various lands of Middle Earth, depending on where this film takes us. And look, we start in the Shire, we eventually go through the mountains and into Moria, we end up in Riverdale, and we are able to experience so much of Middle Earth just in this first segment.
I know
of this grand story. And to me, I just love how immersive the film is in that regard. The characters and the performances that emulate the traits of these characters are just incredible. Everyone is bringing their best effort here. And Peter Jackson's storytelling is so sharp and astute. Every edit here, every frame, every detail that goes into each scene has a purpose. And I absolutely love how those things coalesce here. And then as you're talking about, we see this fellowship come together only for it to crumble. And that irony here, I think, is quite fantastic. What we see with Boromir especially is just wonderful. And another thing about this film that we did talk about quite extensively when we reviewed this a few years ago.
Yeah.
I love not just Peter Jackson's storytelling broadly, but how he invokes Middle Earth or lore or mythology in these really clever and subtle ways that cues us into what we're about to experience without explaining a single thing. I always go to
I'm with you.
the scene where Gimli tells Gandalf that they can take a shortcut through the mines of Moria and that his cousin Balin will greet them there. But Peter Jackson doesn't explain any of that. We don't know what the hell a Balin is. What's a Moria?
That's what I love about it. It turns us into foreigners
Yes.
in this world. It weirdly invites us along in that regard, which I think is so fascinating.
I completely agree. So I just love the majesty of all of these films, but how we are introduced to that here, introduced to these characters, it's immaculate. I could spend all day in this world, even just with this film, and never get tired of it. I love it. For me, it's the best of the three if we are splitting them up, although I do agree with you. It's essentially one long film. But yeah, everything about this film is perfect. I wouldn't change a single thing about it.
Nope.
And, the additions, like in the extended cut, I think are, it just makes the film even better for me.
I'm with
doesn't always happen, especially with a grand epic like this, where it turns into a 3.5 hour, 4 hour experience. And yet it's still as mesmerizing as ever. So
it's so good. It's so good. So my number 7, your number 4. I'm trying to keep track of this so we don't get too confused. It seems like right now we're at my number 6. So,
yes.
And again, my number 6, it better be on your list. If it's not, I'm going to be shocked. Ocean's 11.
5.
Okay. Thank God. Thank God.
Yeah.
All right, we're tightening things up a little bit. Like this is why I wanted to do the exercise this way, because I knew we'd have a couple outliers that we get out of the way. But then all of a sudden, it's like, okay, you've got this one, you've got this one. Okay, so here we are. Is this the sexiest and most fun movie ever made? And I mean that as a serious question.
It might be.
It's not tongue in cheek. But again, like this goes back to what I talked about in the beginning of this episode and how the year 2001 we see now as one of the great movie years, but it may not have started out that way. And I feel like Ocean's 11 is one of those films that was always well regarded, but in the landscape of pop entertainment nowadays, this film has only gotten better. And it's because of that sexiness. It's because of the vibe it consistently holds and creates, the playfulness and the banter and the dialogue. So the script writing here is wonderful. So I feel like it's only gotten better with time simply because it cares about creating blockbuster entertainment and character interactions as opposed to just spectacle. I mean, the spectacle itself, the heist itself, it's elaborate and it's well staged, but it's kind of secondary. In fact, even during the heist, many characters take pauses just to converse with one another in a very fun way. Like that is what the film is most interested in. And I think it blows the doors off of its initial film. Its predecessor, it is a remake after all. This could be one of the best remakes ever made, honestly. It's very much in that conversation. And one of Steven Soderbergh's best films. I think it's a top 3 Soderbergh film.
Yeah, absolutely. Everything about this film is so incredible. The cast, everyone here is working with incredible synergy, and they all are mesmerizing in their own various ways. And I love how each character brings their own quirk to this movie, such as Brad Pitt incessantly eating throughout the film, which is challenging when you're on a diet. Do not watch this film when you're on a diet. But each of these characters have their own little quirks, and it's so diverting. It's so entertaining. It's sexy. It's cool. Everything is tantalizing. This is popcorn entertainment at its finest. And it never gets tiresome at all. Soderbergh operating at his very best. This is, probably his best movie. I don't know if I can think of one that is better. I love Solaris. That one is for me that will compete, but
Out of Sight, maybe.
Out of Sight is also great. Though that's my top 3 there for sure.
Okay.
But this film is as great as any modern blockbuster can be. And as you noted, we've talked about this before, given the state of Hollywood now, you look at this film through that prism and it might as well be Citizen Kane. Like it's really proficient. Everything about this film is quintessential as far as popcorn entertainment goes.
Oh yeah. Between this and Wet Hot American Summer on my list, the 2 most rewatchable films of
Very
the year
rewatchable.
for me. Yeah. It doesn't mean they're the best, but they're the ones that if I need just a vibe to forget about how bad my day was, I'm going to those 2 films from this year. And they'll make me feel better. They will make me feel better.
This is one of those movies where if I'm ever feeling sad or feeling a certain way and I need to be uplifted, or I just want to experience cinema in such a pure way, this is a movie that I'll put on immediately. I will always go to this as one of those experiences because it's just riveting joy.
It's wonderful. It's wonderful. So it's my number 6, which means we're up to your number 6 because I don't know what your number 6 is.
Okay.
I have a guess.
Okay.
Is it Mulholland Drive?
Well done.
Okay.
Well done. I mean, a little bit of because I know what the 3 is going to be, so it's a little bit of
it is. So I had to think, wait,
there.
what film is left that it must be this one. It must be this one.
Yeah, and Mulholland Drive is the film that ultimately kicked out Black Hawk Down, and Mulholland Drive is a film that I already liked, but on this rewatch, it's I don't know. There's something about it this time around that absolutely captivated me because, and I still have yet to watch all of David Lynch's films, but what I love about this movie is that it's somehow confounding and lucid simultaneously. The symbolism here is pretty familiar, and Lynch is very assiduous in his direction in order to make it attainable. But of course, the way he presents the story is, well, Lynchian. I don't know if there's another way to articulate it.
He created his own directorial style, and I love it.
Absolutely. It's a verb now. And as a result, there's a lot of fun to be had with this film. It has a captivating sense of mystery. There's a palpable uncertainty to the film. And as it almost becomes a completely different experience midway through, it's able to render catharsis without spoon feeding the audience. And that is really tricky, I think, to pull off because there is a lot going on here when you look at the 2 halves that David Lynch is conveying here, and it's almost dreamlike state that we see in the first half, which comes through in the performances and how they are a little bit over the top, I guess. The inflection of what we see in terms of the lighting, there's everything is heightened in the first half of the film, and it gives us this sense of fantasy. And then you juxtapose that to what we see in the back half, which is much more grim and brooding and dark, and how he's able to maintain that sense of mystery and that sense of confounding, trying to figure out what's going on here while making everything understood through that dichotomy of fantasy and reality. I just think is incredibly ravishing here. So and that's something I certainly wouldn't have picked up on in high school. Like I wouldn't have been
No,
able to
you watch it then, it's just, oh, weird
analyze
movie,
it
cool.
that way.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But now watching it 20 years later through the lens of, doing this the last 10 years, and of course just maturing as a human being, broadly speaking, and it was just a very different experience.
Yeah.
And one that just floored me. Absolutely loved it. I mean, because you think about the Lynchian aspects of it, and I do love that about his movies, but you almost forget, or at least I was almost caught off guard by how subversive the film is tonally, because this film is actually quite funny. And in a lot of places,
the assassination scene, like what, third of the way through, this assassin that completely botches his operation.
Yeah, that whole thing, or
Yeah.
The confrontation at the house with the big,
Yeah.
goon,
Oh, the big
whatever,
goon,
the paint
yeah.
and all that stuff. Like
The,
it's just really
yeah.
funny and goofy.
Yeah.
I mean, even that scene when, Naomi Watts' character, she goes in and does this performance and is incredibly stunning. But you think about the context of what's at play there, and there's of course a slight humor to it all, and of course it's all heightened because of the fantasy element of it. But tonally speaking, I just love how Lynch is able to kind of pull the rug there.
Well, this is what makes Lynch so good, because any director can just be weird for weird's sake and trip you up every step that he or she can. But with Lynch, there's always some type of through line. You might not recognize what that through line is, but there's something tying that weirdness together. And in the case of Mulholland Drive, you get this sense of this heavy passion for something artistic that just isn't attainable for someone, and the sense of jealousy that comes with it. But I think what's so fascinating about Mulholland Drive and how the film almost recontextualizes itself the more you watch it is, on its simple terms, you can almost see this as just a love story. And on those merits, like a love story in Hollywood, and on those merits, it still works, just looking at it in a very simple way like that. I think that's the brilliance of the film. Admittedly, there are other David Lynch films I prefer that I just get more of an emotional response from, like Blue Velvet, for instance. I just, for some reason, that one provokes me a bit more. And that's no knock on Mulholland Drive and how well it stacks up in this specific year that we're talking about. It's my number 12. It just missed my top 10.
Okay.
And I think it's primarily because there are things about David Lynch I prefer in his other films that this one just doesn't quite have for me. And it's hard to explain what that is. It's just the Lynchian of it all. Like, you don't know what it is sometimes as far as why some work over others. But that's more or less the case. This is one that I could see growing for me and maybe finding a place in my top 10 as time goes on. But it is easily one of the best films of the year. I can see why it was nominated for Best Director at the Oscars.
For sure. Absolutely. Best Director. I love the performances here. I had both of them nominated in their respective categories. And yeah, and I think a lot of it also just comes down to that duality. And the supporting characters here are great too. And I love how, because everyone has to give a dual performance, or at least most everyone.
Yeah.
And that comes through, I think, quite well. And while adding to, because again, there's a lucidity to it, while simultaneously being confounding. And the performers have to be attuned to that. It's not just Lynch and his storytelling. So how they're able to manufacture that, I think, is incredible. I mean, that's real tricky. And if one performer is off even just by a little bit, it's probably a little easier to figure out what's happening. But I think everyone is, again, working in this synergistic way that it works incredibly well. And to me, it's engrossing. I loved it.
Yep.
Just,
so that's
just as a mystery, just as a romance, just as a, just as a movie, just the diverting entertainment factor of it, I think is great. And then there's all of the thematic,
and there's such a there's a literal haziness to it. And then the performances in that first half, especially from Naomi Watts, it almost feels like one of those like Technicolor romances from the 1940s or 1950s. It's in many ways her
theatrical. Yeah,
but in many ways her performance at first, it's very overacted and melodramatic.
That's what
that's what I love about it.
It's all heightened, like it's all over the top.
It's overperformed. And then when the reveal start happening and you actually realize who that character is. And then it just completely changes and it becomes a completely different movie.
It's wholly juxtaposed, and we get
Yeah.
to see what reality is. And as I noted earlier, it's very doleful. It's very bleak.
Mm-hmm.
And
All right.
and somehow he makes that tonal transition work. It's elaborate but effective.
But it's there. It's there. There's a path to get there for sure.
Absolutely.
So that was your number 6. Let's look at this list because I think all we have to do is my number 5, and then we get to our respective top 3s. Because we already got to your number 5. It was Ocean's 11 because it was my number 6. Your number 4 was Lord of the Rings, Fellowship of the Ring, because it was my number 7. So my number 5 is clearly not on your list. And we talked about this offline. I think you know where I'm going with this. But I recently, in my last minute prep for homework here, I caught up with a film that I don't think you had the chance to see yet, JD. And that's the Japanese horror film Cure from director Kiyoshi Kurosawa. He's also the director of the film Pulse, which I think many people have been praising as well. It's a film I admittedly have not seen. The film Cure was actually released in 1997 in Japan, but got release here in the States, an independent release in 2001. I think it was July of 2001, if I'm not mistaken.
So apparently not too dissimilar from Millennium Actress.
So you're going to forget about this and put it in your
notes.
1997 list, aren't you?
Yeah, apparently. I'm going to make specific note of that. Not 1997.
I do think it's actually very appropriate talking about this film, just talking about David Lynch, though, because there are very Lynchian aspects here. The film at first is a horrific murder mystery. It's very much in the vein of like a David Fincher 7 in a very sadistic kind of way before it really takes its central premise literally and becomes everything that it's depicting. So this is really a tale of gruesome murder sweeping Tokyo. And the interesting thing is the killer for each of these murders is there and captured at every murder. So the mystery is what's fueling these people to commit these same crimes by carving this X in their victims. And it turns out it's a form of hypnotic persuasion. And it becomes a very literally hypnotic movie by the final act in ways that I can only describe as Lynchian. And I think where the film really got to me and why it horrified me, it's the methods of hypnotic persuasion that we see, because it's a way of getting into a person's psychology to influence them to look back at their deepest insecurities and force them to act on them. And it just goes to show our deepest insecurities can actually be the most dangerous weapon sometimes. So from that perspective, the film really worked for me. And just from an aesthetic perspective, I don't know how you're going to react to this one, JD, but I was blown away by this thing. As you can tell, it's my number 5. It is a really great horror film. It's not even really a horror film. It is, but it isn't. It's a horrifying film. But this one really, really worked for me. I don't want to get too much into it because I know you haven't seen it. But I do think this is a pretty darn good film. It's available on the Criterion channel if you have a subscription there. It's really worth a watch.
Yep, we'll definitely add that to the list. I do want to check it out. I had heard great things, simply ran out of time, unfortunately. But yeah, definitely hope to get to it soon. That's for sure.
All right, so that leaves our top 3s, right?
That's
all that's left. So I guess I was right. We have the same top 3. It's just a different order.
Yes. So going back to where we were when you wrote down your top 3. So the audience knows your top 3 in order.
Should I show it again just to reiterate? Do you want to block your eyes?
Okay. All right. I'll block myself here.
Let me get it closer in case our listeners can't quite read my handwriting, but that's what it is. Okay, go ahead.
Okay. Can I guess the order?
Go ahead. You can guess the order.
So I don't know the order. This is my guess for Brendan. At number 1 is AI, artificial intelligence.
Okay.
At number 2 is In the Mood for Love. And at number 3, The Royal Tenenbaums.
All right, this is what I wrote.
I'm a little bit surprised. Okay. I'm a little surprised.
Now, I will say, in actuality, my numbers 2 and 3 are really 2A and 2B. You're not wrong in many ways, JD, because I originally did have that order. It was our conversation just yesterday as we're recording this that maybe temporarily pushed the Royal Tenenbaums to my number 2.
Okay.
Now, could that switch between In the Mood for Love and Royal Tenenbaums once again? Maybe. But the fact of the matter is we're talking about 3 all-timers right now.
Yes.
We really are. Now, if I were to guess, now they're your top 3 as well, right?
Uh-huh.
All right. Your order, I assume, is number 1, Royal Tenenbaums.
Mm-hmm.
Number 2, AI, and number 3, In the Mood for Love.
Yes.
That's
is
it?
my
Okay.
order. Yep.
All right. So I guess we'll start with In the Mood for Love, which we have
Yeah.
reviewed on this show. We
Yes.
technically the In Session Film podcast has reviewed
it
twice.
Because you and I did a review, and then Ryan and Jay did one during their Wong Kar-wai series.
Yeah.
So there's 2 reviews that anyone listening to this, if you want to go and hear any of them, they're certainly available there at InSessionFilm.com. But yeah, I mean, it's one of the most evocative romantic films of all time.
Yeah. Yeah.
The performances.
Oh, so good. So it's one of the best shot films I think
The
I've ever seen.
cinematography here is just it's
Christopher
stupidly
Doyle.
stunning.
Oh my gosh, what wonderful work! It's
so good.
one of the most beautiful soundtracks coupling this quote unquote romance. I just, you know me, JD. I love movies like this. These are like these romantic what if movies. What I think is just so great about this one is it's kind of an anti-romance in some ways.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, I think I heard that the original draft did have our 2 lead characters sleeping together. And I'm so glad it does not go that route.
I agree.
Because the whole point of this movie is how they are struggling to not act on their romantic impulses.
They do not indulge in it, at least not physically.
Yeah. I mean, they sort of play with it in an almost like fetishistic way by reenacting their own spouses being unfaithful to them and how that could play out. So there is kind of a fetishistic quality to their relationship, but there also is this relatability in what they're both going through. But it also speaks to the cultural and political times that this takes place in, where acting on these impulses would not only get you in trouble, it would get you ostracized. And that's something that I think Wong Kar-wai is demonstrating here. And it also helps that you've got 2 amazing performances. Tony Leung and Maggie Cheung are wonderful, absolutely wonderful here.
Absolutely. I echo everything you're saying. It's this incredible reflection on the socio-political tensions of their world in the early 60s, but it's ultimately this romantic film about human longing and this desire for love. And you center that through this incredible irony where their spouses cheated on each other and left, and it's left them in this weird space where they could do the same thing in the aftermath of it. And maybe there's a murkiness there because they're technically not with their partners anymore. But that's what makes it strange, maybe a little bit taboo, and why they don't indulge in it. Again, at least not physically, but emotionally, there's absolutely a murkiness to it all.
For sure.
And man, does Wong Kar-wai emphasize and tease us with that romanticism in these incredible.
He does it visually. There is this sexiness to the film in the way that it utilizes slow motion, the music, as we alluded to already, the cinematography by Christopher Doyle, the tight spaces. This almost feels like a prison movie at times. The way people are almost claustrophobically framed and boxed in. So when characters walk down a hallway and they have to brush past each other, there's it almost turns into a gesture.
Provocative.
Yeah, I love it.
I love it as well. And so, yeah, the whole time it's almost as if you're salivating for them to indulge in that romance. Wong Kar-wai is certainly giving us that tease. And because of how he writes these characters, how they're performed, we do empathize with them. We understand this yearning for each other, and obviously them grieving, trying to cope, trying to understand all of this.
Yep.
But even though the film, the characters they don't give us what we want in that regard, but that's what makes it so compelling, is that we understand why they don't. And we would have understood if they did. It kind of goes both ways. But from a cinematic perspective, it's just exquisite to watch. It's incredible.
Wonderful film. So then that leaves our top two, which are the same top two, just switched for both of us. Do we need to talk about them really in detail? I mean, we gave a full review of the Royal Tenenbaums already, which is available now on all of our streaming platforms that you can go and check out. We talked about that movie for what? Almost 2 hours?
An hour and 40 minutes.
There it is. There it is.
Yes.
That's a full podcast episode. And that was just on that movie.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
It was
worth it. It was worth it.
There was a little bit of pretext in how we talked about Wes Anderson and how we felt about that film before this exercise. So the review really kicks in about 15 minutes into that.
But even
episode.
so, we kind of tailored those opening thoughts with the Royal Tenenbaums, or at least I kind of did. So I got into my thoughts with it pretty early, and I still stand by thinking that this is perhaps not just the best directed Wes Anderson film as far as tone management, like we talked about, but in many ways, kind of the definitive definition of a Wes Anderson film. It has the early qualities of his more indie roots, but with those dollhousey vibes that he would really dive headfirst into in his later films. It's like a Wes Anderson buffet all rolled into one movie. And that could be a recipe for disaster. It could be, it could almost be insufferable because of that, but it's not. It's a beautiful movie.
Absolutely. It's incredible. I do have that here as my number one. I won't get into it too much because, again, just go listen to that episode. But for those that haven't had a chance to listen yet, I will just reiterate, as much as I love Wes Anderson, and he's one of my favorite filmmakers working today, it is my favorite Wes Anderson. It's one of my favorite films of all time. And I think what really draws me to it is that it has that quirkiness. It has the eccentricity of Wes Anderson. It's very funny, but at the core of that film is this deep, palpable sorrow, this melancholy that just lingers over every frame. And I love that tonal balancing act. It is truly mesmerizing. Very few filmmakers have been able to capture the levels and extremes that Wes Anderson evokes in that film. And the performances are just incredible. We talked about Luke Wilson quite a bit on that episode.
Yeah, we talked about him a lot. Yeah, he was kind of the star of that podcast.
I mean, it's his best performance, and it's an underrated performance because people don't really talk about it all that much, but it's truly one of the best of that year. Ben Stiller, of course, is really great. Gene Hackman gives one of the best performances maybe ever. It's just that good, I think.
Yeah, we talked about that. I think we both agreed that it's the best performance of 2001. Gene Hackman's performance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I really love that film and love what it's aiming for, and it's something Wes just simply hasn't gone back to until Asteroid City. He does,
which carries some of that
back
melancholy
to that a little bit, but Royal Tenenbaums I just adore with every fiber of my being. So it is my number one, but my number two, which is obviously Brendan's number one, is it's interesting how this is the film that maybe most quintessentially circles back to what we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation in terms of reevaluation.
Yep.
Because in 2001, I wouldn't say that this was beloved, certainly not to the degree we're talking about it here.
No.
And maybe even 10 years ago, it really hadn't quite reached the heights it does now. But I do think its reputation is very different now than it was 10, 20 years ago.
Agreed.
People do think of this as Spielberg operating. And I think it's because, look, we're coming off the heels, we're not too far removed from something like Saving Private Ryan, or even a few years before that, Schindler's List, or you look at his stuff in the 80s. This is a very different Spielberg when we get to something like
this
AI.
era of Spielberg is so fascinating because he still taps into this this cynicism of sorts, this coldness, this bleakness that also would bleed into movies like Minority Report or War of the Worlds. It's Munich, another great example that's not too far removed from this era. It's a very different Spielberg. It's not necessarily an era where I think he's making the greatest films of his career in totality, but it's him at his most fascinating. Although I do think AI is maybe his. It's so hard to say. I think AI is his best movie because I feel like that spot should be reserved for something that is solely Spielbergian, like E.T., right? Like that is a Spielberg film through and through, and AI is, of course, a collaborative effort. And I think what makes the film so fascinating, why there's nothing else like it, is because of that synergy between Steven Spielberg and Stanley Kubrick. And their respective DNAs are both in the movie. It just turns into a Spielberg film because he was obligated to direct it after Kubrick's passing.
Yeah, and it's interesting you bring up E.T. because I think this is a captivating answer to something like E.T., which ends in
kind of a yin and yang to that
hopeful, more emotional, sentimental way that I love. E.T. is a classic and one of Spielberg's best. This is wholly juxtaposed to that. When you look at David, who is, I guess, the E.T. character here, and what we get in AI is brutal. It is extremely bleak.
Oh my gosh.
And that's hard to wrap your mind around because it is Spielberg. And at this point in his career, Saving Private Ryan had, perhaps it had its melancholy. It certainly was, it's a war movie. So there's violence and there's sorrow to it, but not like you could almost argue that for all of the brutality of Saving Private Ryan, and that opening is quite graphic. And I still think that AI is maybe more brutal. Like it's more harrowing to watch. At least, you can make that argument.
You can.
Because
I think
it's so devastating.
It's one of the bleakest movies ever made. And we talked about that extensively when you reviewed the film. Another film that we've reviewed on the podcast during our Spielberg movie series. This was episode 478. And I think it was one of my favorite conversations we've ever done. Just the detail that we went into. We almost kind of storyboarded that review talking about it because we made our way to that controversial ending and really talked about why we think both of those sensibilities of these directors, Kubrick and Spielberg, work perfectly for that ending to create this facade of happiness when that's anything but what it is. I love that. I love the way it taps into grief, especially from the perspective of a child. If you want to even consider David a child, I just simply think I do think AI might be the greatest movie ever made. I seriously think I get that close whenever I think about this movie.
Okay.
I really, we're at least talking about a film that's in my top 5 favorites. So maybe I'm skewing it because I have such a personal relationship to it, but I don't know. It's getting harder to convince me otherwise that it should be in the conversation for one of the greatest movies ever made.
It's really great. It's certainly one of the best films of 2001. It's one of the best films of the 2000s. And I guess spoiler alert for our best of the decade episode. This film will
Spoiler alert
certainly
for our
be
best of the decade.
represented.
It's my number one.
Yeah, it will be represented for sure.
Yeah.
And I'm with you. I think it's such an interesting film in the context of Spielberg's
Yeah.
filmography, because there really isn't much, because for all the brutality of Saving Private Ryan, and you see how that film ends, and I do love that film much more than you do, but I
Yeah.
do think it harkens back to an idea and perhaps a sentimentality that is 80s 90s Spielberg. This to me is a completely different guy. This is a way more cynical, way more pessimistic Spielberg.
For sure. Yeah.
That we just hadn't seen yet. And but it's incredible. Like the craftsmanship and the artistry here is still as impressive as ever
Yeah.
with Spielberg. But he's tapping into an emotional agency that is just brand new to him. That would follow with some of the other films that Brendan noted earlier.
Yeah.
But it starts here. It starts with AI. And,
It really does. Yeah, it's a good
love
point.
it. It's incredible. It to me, it is one of his best movies, hands
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
Not even close.
Top 3 at the very least.
Yeah,
Number 1 for me.
absolutely.
Yeah. So
And
good.
mine number 2
so
on this list.
good. So
All right, so
good.
as we wind down this conversation, because we went all over the place, let's bring some clarity to our top 10 list.
Yeah, let's do that.
So here is mine. At number 1, I have the Royal Tenenbaums. At number 2, I have AI, artificial intelligence. At number 3, In the Mood for Love. At number 4, Fellowship of the Ring. At number 5, Ocean's 11. At 6, Mulholland Drive. 7, Memento. 8, The Devil's Backbone. 9, Amelie. 10, Moulin Rouge. That is my top 10 of 2001.
And my top 10 of 2001 is number 1, AI, artificial intelligence. Number 2, The Royal Tenenbaums. Number 3, In the Mood for Love. Number 4, The Devil's Backbone. Number 5, Cure. Number 6, Ocean's 11. Number 7, The Lord of the Rings, The Lord of the Rings, The Fellowship of the Ring. Too many kings, rings, lings. It's too many rhyming schemes there. Number 8, Memento. Number 9, Wet Hot American Summer. Number 10, Black Hawk Down.
Okay, and then here's my 11 through 20. So to round up my top 20, at number 11 is Black Hawk Down. At number 12, I have the Coen Brothers, The Man Who Wasn't There.
Okay.
At 13, I have Waking Life.
All right.
Later. 14, I have Ghost World. 15 is Training Day. 16 is Monsters, Inc. 17 is Hedwig and the Angry Inch. 18 is The Others. 19 is the French film Fat Girl.
Okay.
And number 20, Wet Hot American Summer, as I noted earlier. That rounds out my 20.
I'm making notes here to see how many crossovers we actually have in our full top 20, because I'm genuinely curious. It's always more than half. It's always at least dang close to that. So, all right. So at number 11, I have Ghost World. At number 12, Mulholland Drive.
Okay.
Number 13, Monsters Incorporated. Number 14, Gosford Park.
Okay. Yeah. I like it.
Yeah, I like it too. Number 15, Waking Life. Number 16, Training Day. Number 17, American Pie 2.
Oh, God.
I'm a defender of that movie. Shut up. Number 18, In the Bedroom. Number 19, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone.
Wow. You have that in your top 20, huh?
It's a nostalgia pick for me. That was a formative film for me. Like that was one of those movies that really sort of transitioned me into a different phase of movie going and film loving.
Wow,
It really did. I acknowledge it's not the greatest of films, especially in this franchise, but I don't know. Nostalgia speaks pretty high.
Fair enough. Yeah.
Number 20 for me is Legally Blonde.
Wow. Okay. So you're a couple of those you're way higher on than me.
There are some films there I do quite love. So let's see how much did we actually have as far as crossover is concerned. Quite a few.
Yeah, quite a few. So Royal, In the Mood for Love, AI, Lord of the Rings, Ocean's 11, Mulholland Drive, Memento, Devil's Backbone. So those 8.
We have seven movies that are outliers from your list. So we have 13 crossover.
There you go.
We got to think of a new podcast name. Movie Brain Shared the Same or something.
Yeah.
There's a T-shirt idea. Maybe we have to come up with a T-shirt that emphasizes our shared brain on this podcast.
Yeah. I mean, I will say this. I do respect the Sorcerer's Stone pick. I can't quite manufacture my list if I'm looking at it more objectively to fit it in there.
Yeah, I struggle with that, but it's kind of a staple in my life. Like it's part of my DNA. It really is.
Fair enough.
Which is interesting because I don't even rank it in my top 5 Harry Potter movies. So
no, neither do I. That's why I was a little bit surprised because I like the film a lot. I really do. Like as a Harry Potter nerd, and those that follow us on Patreon, you know I'm a huge nerd of Harry Potter. I've talked about
you are now. You've read the books
over the
finally.
Summer. However, as much as I like it, I just can't quite get there, but I do admire that. And as far as some of these others, because I noted earlier, there was quite a few films fighting for like those last few slots there. Because In the Bedroom, I really like a lot. That might be my number 21.
Okay.
Gosford Park is certainly fighting for a spot there. Inarritu's Amoris Perros is freaking brutal. That's another one of those bleak movies that I admire, but just couldn't quite get it in there. Sexy Beast I also really liked and thought heavily to kind of fit it in there. So yeah, I mean there's still some really good movies in that.
Yeah, Michael Mann's Ali with Will Smith.
Yeah, Ali is another one. Yeah,
yeah. I don't love it through and through, but it would probably be somewhere in my top 30 if I'm being honest.
It'd be in that 21 through 30 range for me for sure.
Yeah,
absolutely. So. With how high at number 30?
Yeah, you give
That's
me
my
grief
American Pie
for
too.
having American Pie. Okay, now we're even. I guess not quite because I had it way higher than that.
Yeah,
this American Pie 2 I did. So, all right,
anyway,
it is what it is.
Before we get more high, we'll go ahead and round out this conversation.
Yes,
that's our top 20 of 2001. It was a really fun time. We hope you enjoyed it. Please leave us any feedback that you have. You can email us in sessionfilm@gmail.com. You can hit us up on social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. What else am I missing? I think that's it. Yeah. Okay. That'll do it then. That's our 2001 retrospective. Brendan, do you have any final thoughts on anything before we get out of here?
I am exhausted. I am exhausted after that.
It was a fun time.
This was a worthy time. Was this your favorite retrospective exercise that we've done yet?
It's at least been the most gratifying since 2007, since we did that year.
And when I ask that, I don't mean the year itself as far as how good the year was for film, but the excitement that we had just going through our lists in podcast form, the conversation that we had with each other. This was my favorite conversation that we've had among these retrospectives.
Yeah, no, this was a ton of fun because of the visual component. Again, I apologize to those that are just listening to this.
Still have it written here. It didn't change anything.
Because of the visual component, we wanted to have a little fun with that. So if you do listen to this, maybe just go check out those parts on YouTube.
Yeah.
Because, that was a lot of fun. And do look forward to next year when we get to 2000 and Best of the Decade.
Oh, my gosh. Now there's a chore. Oof.
It's going to be a great time, though. But thank you, everyone, for tuning in. Again, please stay tuned to the Royal Tenenbaums. That review is out right now. So go and check that out. And we'll get back to 2023 in the next week. We will have some more reviews.
Right. We still have a movie year to contend with.
Flora and the Sun is available. The Creator, that's coming out.
That's coming out this weekend. Yeah.
We definitely have some reviews we got to get to for sure.
Yep, sure.
So we'll transition back to 2023 here soon as well. So stay tuned for that. For now, thanks for listening, everybody. Thanks for watching. We will see you all next time on the In Session Film Podcast. Oh, man, Brendan, that top 3, just stunning.
I've always wanted to be a Tenenbaum.